The palace walls held secrets, but none as dangerous as the letters King Charles discovered inside it. Camilla, his words to her former lover, tore through him like a blade, causing him to collapse in shock. What seemed like a marriage of endure, and suddenly fractured under the weight of betrayal. The king couldn't believe what Camilla had done, said a royal aide. The letters did not just expose feelings long buried, they carried revelations, capable of destroying the crown itself. And now only the king's next move would decide. Discovering the hidden letters the palace had always been filled with. Secrets, but this one had been buried deeper than anyone expected. In a distant corner of the royal residence, an old chest was opened during a routine cleaning. Inside it were stacks of paper tied together with worn ribbons that looked as though they had not been touched in decades. The handwriting on the envelopes was elegant, written with care, and each one carried Camilla's name on the corner. A maid paused and whispered, "These don't look ordinary." She hesitated before passing them to a senior aide, who knew at once that they could not be ignored. The letters were placed in a folder and carried until they reached King Charles's private study. Charles was sitting at his desk when the aide walked in. His eyes narrowed when he saw the folder being handed over. He asked softly, "What is this again?" The aide explained, and Charles waved his hands, signaling to leave him alone. He opened the folder slowly, unsure of what he was about to uncover. At first he thought they might be harmless notes or old records, but as he untied the ribbon, a faint scent of faded perfume lingered on the paper. His chest tightened. The first letter was written with affection that struck him immediately. Words flowed across the page, describing feelings that were not meant for him. They were meant for another man, a former lover whom Camilla had once held close in her heart. Charles sat back in his chair. He muttered, "Why now? Why? Why after all these years?" He picked up another letter, then another. Each one carried words that felt sharper than blades. The letters had not been destroyed as he believed. They had been hidden away, tucked in a place that no one was supposed to find. Yet here they were, in his hands, forcing him to relive parts of a past he had fought so hard to move on from. He turned the pages, slowly reading the confessions of love, the longing, the passion that Camilla once poured into every sentence. His heart pounded as he realized how much of her life had been kept away from him, even after all the years they had shared together. Just then a voice from the hallway broke his thoughts. A staff member, seeing him in that last state, asked, "Is everything all right, Your Majesty?" Charles quickly closed the folder and replied with a strained tone, "Leave me, I need to be alone." As the door shut, Charles leaned forward, pressing his hand against his forehead. The discovery was more than just about letters, it was about trust. He had believed those chapters of Camilla's life were over, sealed away. But now the evidence proved otherwise. He whispered, "How many lies have been covered up?" As he flipped through more on the lopes, the date stood out to him. Some of the letters were written in moments when he had thought their own bond was strong. Others were written long before, but the words carried the same weight. He clinched the papers, feeling his hands shake. The ink had not faded completely, and the emotions written there felt alive, as though they had been sealed only yesterday. One line in particular made him stand up. Suddenly his chair pushed back against the floor as he muttered, "I cannot bear this." The clock on the wall ticked, marking each heavy second. As he stood alone in the study, he knew these letters would change everything. They could not simply be put back in the chest and forgotten. A guard passing by whispered to another, "Something has upset him." The whispers spread through the corridors, even though no one truly knew what Charles had found. He sat down again, gripping the folder, as though it might disappear if he let go. His thoughts raced between anger, sorrow, and disbelief. He wanted to throw the letters into the fire, to burn them to ashes, but something inside him stopped his hand. He needed to know more. He needed to read every word. The hours dragged on as he continued to go through them. Outside, the palace carried on with its usual rhythm, but inside that study, Charles felt it, as though the walls were closing in. He muttered again, "This changes everything between us." By the time he reached the final letter, his eyes were heavy, but his mind was sharper than ever. He pushed the folder aside and stared at the window, lost in thought. The night had fallen and the shadows stretched long across the room. Charles felt the weight of history pressing down on him. He knew that what he had found was not just a personal wound, it was a secret that could tear through his marriage and shake the crown itself. Meanwhile, in the hallway, another aide whispered, "The king has locked himself in for hours." The worry was spreading, but no one dared disturb him. Charles stood once more, clutching the folder close to his chest. He knew he could not carry this burden forever. Currently donors and challenging things I knew worry all time, said he admitted to himself that at some point he would have to confront Camilla. At some point, the truth would break free from these pages. But for now he sat back at his desk, staring down at the letters that refused to clear from his mind. He whispered to himself, "This is only the beginning." And in that moment the palace itself seemed heavier, as though it to carry the weight of the hidden letters that had finally surfaced. The painful words inside the folder sat on King Charles' his desk like a wound that refused to heal. He could have locked it away, yet he chose to open it again. The letter seemed to call to him, pulling him back to words he wished he had never seen. He picked up the first one again, his fingers trembling as he unfolded the paper. The sentences were written in a way that cut deeply. The words were not vague, but filled with emotion, filled with memories that had no place in his present life. Charles whispered, "How could she write this?" He leaned closer, reading every stroke of ink, as if the letters themselves spoke out loud. One line told of a love that had once felt unstoppable. Another described the joy of secret meetings, the rush of stolen time, the thrill of forbidden affection. Every phrase pulled Charles into a place he never wanted to enter. He muttered, "These words were never meant for me." The pain grew sharper with every page. Camilla had poured her heart into those letters. The way she described her feelings made it clear that the emotions were real, not fake, not careless. For Charles, that truth struck harder than any accusation. He read on, finding passages where Camilla described dreams of a future that never happened. There were lines about holding on to someone she could not let go of, no matter the cost. Charles pushed the paper away, but then he pulled it back, unable to stop himself. He said under his breath, "She never truly left him." The meaning of those words pressed against him. His chest tightened, and his throat felt dry. He stood up and walked to the window, gripping the curtain, as though he needed something to steady him. The view outside showed the palace gardens, but to Charles it was blurred like a painting, ruined by water or not. Came at the door, and a voice asked, "Do you need anything, Your Majesty?" Charles answered firmly, "No, stay away." The voice faded, and once again he was left with nothing but the pages that tore through his soul. He sat back down, forcing himself to read another. This one was longer, filled with reflections, with promises, with words that spoke of passion that had been hidden away. Every sentence felt alive, even though years had passed. His hands shook his. He whispered, "She kept this part of herself from me." He thought of the years he had spent believing in their bond. He thought of the struggles they had faced together, of the way he had defended her against criticism, of the sacrifices made to be with her. Now those efforts felt overshadowed by words written long ago, words that showed she once belonged completely to another. The folder still held more pages. He hesitated, but the pull was too strong. He reached for another letter. Slowly his eyes moved across the lines, and every sentence felt heavier than the last. Camilla had written about longing when they were apart, about finding strength and memories, about feeling alive and moments that belonged to someone else. Charles, his voice cracked as he muttered, "She carried him in her heart, even when she was with me." The room filled cold, or as he continued to read, his crown, his duties, his role as monarch, all seemed small compared to the pain of knowing the woman beside him had once written such words for another. He pressed the letter to the desk, his fist gripping it firmly. He could not escape the emotions running through him. He wanted to hate the letters, but he could not deny their truth. He spoke again, almost like a plea. "Why didn't she destroy them?" A shadow passed across the door as an aide whispered to another, "He hasn't left that room for hours." The whispers continued down the hallway, but no one dared to step inside. Inside the study, Charles' world was unraveling line by line. The words on the paper had more power than any political threat, more weight than any scandal. Reached into the deepest part of him, breaking down the walls he had built. "Every word feels like betrayal," he whispered. The letters described moments of laughter, of closeness, of passion. They spoke of a bond that had shaped Camilla's life in ways Charles could not erase. He felt as though he was standing outside his own marriage, looking at something he had never truly understood. The pain was not just in the past, it was in the way the words lived on, refusing to dissolve even after decades. Charles pushed the folder away, then pulled it back again, caught in a cycle of torment he could not escape. He muttered, "I cannot unsee this, I cannot unknow this." The hours passed in the study grew darker. Still Charles remained at his desk, surrounded by letters that told a story he wished had never been written. The words carved themselves into his mind, filling him with doubt, with sorrow, with anger that simmered just beneath the surface. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling as if searching for strength. but the only thing he found was the echo of those painful words haunting him, breaking him down piece by piece. He whispered one last time before closing the folder. These letters have changed everything. And as he sat in the darkened room, holding the weight of words that were never meant for his eyes, Charles knew his life would never feel the same again. A shaken marriage. The palace walls had seen quarrels before, but this tension was different. It was not loud, not explosive, but it spread through every corner like a storm moving, and slowly the letters had left a scar on King Charles, and that scar began to shape the way he looked at Camilla. His age noticed the change. One whispered, "He looks troubled." Another added softly, "Something has shaken him." They did not know the truth, but the signs were there. At the breakfast table, Camilla greeted him with her usual warmth, but Charles barely lifted his eyes. He stirred his tea without drinking it, staring at the cup as though it carried all his worries. Camilla, as gently as, "Something wrong?" Charles only muttered, "Nothing, nothing at all." But the truth was written all over him. He no longer looked at her the same way. He avoided her gaze, avoided her touch. And when she spoke, he often let her words drift past him. The letters had built a wall inside his mind, and that wall stood firmly between them. Charles would walk through the palace corridors with a heavy expression, and it wasn't long before the staff began to sense the distance. A footman remarked, "They hardly speak to each other now." A maid responded, "It feels colder in this place." Even without knowing the reason, they could feel the weight of mistrust in the air. Charles spent more time alone in his study. He buried himself in papers and reports, and anything that would distract him. But no matter how many documents he read, his thoughts always returned to those letters. He would hear Camilla, his voice, but in his head, and mixed with words she had once written to another man. He whispered to himself late at night, "How can I share a life with her when I know these words exist?" Camilla tried to reach him. She sat beside him in the evenings, speaking about daily matters, about family, about royal duties. But Charles listened with half an ear. When she touched his arm, he pulled away. When she asked for his thoughts, he offered short answers. She noticed a change. So one night she asked him, "Have I done something wrong?" Charles looked at her, his eyes dim, and replied, "I cannot talk about it now." His voice was heavy, leaving Camilla in confusion. The days went by, and the gap between them widened. Mealtime became unusually quiet. Walks together became rare. Smiles grew lesser. Charles often stared out of the window instead of looking at her, and Camilla often left the room with a sigh. The whispers inside the palace grew stronger. An aide whispered to a colleague, "Something has happened between them." Another said, "He looks broken, and she looks worried." Charles carried himself like a man torn between love and doubt. He still cared for Camilla, but he could not free himself from the words that burned fiercely inside him. Each letter had planted seeds of mistrust, and those seeds had grown into strong vines wrapping around his heart. He muttered under his breath while pacing his room, "Our marriage was built on understanding, but now I question it all." Camilla, sensing the distance, tried harder to close the gap. She planned small dinners, invited him to spend evenings together, and tried to speak about happy memories. But Charles was uninterested. He smiled faintly at times, but the smile faded quickly. His mind was still locked in those letters. The tension even showed during official appearances. Charles often walked a step ahead, his expression hard. Camilla followed, smiling for the cameras, but those close to or could see the strain, and her eyes. A royal aide whispered, "This is not how they used to be behind closed doors." The strain grew unbearable. Charles sat in his chair one evening, staring at the fire without saying a word. Camilla asked softly, "Please tell me what troubles you." Charles replied, "You know." His words were sharp, leaving her frozen. She walked away, and Charles placed his hand over his chest, as though trying to stop the ache inside. He whispered, "The letters will not leave me." The marriage that once stood firm now felt fragile. Every step, every glance, every word carried tension. The palace staff noticed it more each day. "This is no small matter. This is breaking him," a butler whispered to a colleague. Charles withdrew further. He began to cancel small gatherings, preferring to stay alone. He avoided conversations with Camilla whenever possible. Whenever they were both together, those around noticed the stiffness between them. The once familiar rhythm of their life together was broken, replaced by uneasy silences and heavy pauses. Camilla, desperate to fix it, reached for him one evening, saying softly, "You and I have faced worse. We can face this." Charles looked at her, his eyes filled with sorrow, and replied, "You do not understand what I carry now." Her face failed, and she left the room. Charles leaned back, closing his eyes, whispering, "Our marriage is slipping away." The palace halls echoed with the strain of a relationship shaken to its core. The letters had not only wounded Charles, they had cast a shadow over everything he shared with Camilla. Trust once strong, now felt fragile. Love once steady, now felt uncertain. And as Charles sat alone, staring into the fire, he knew their marriage would never feel the same again. The private confrontation. The letters had weighed on King Charles for days, pressing against his mind until he could no longer carry them alone. He had tried to bury the feelings, tried to hide his doubts, but the pain refused to fade. Each time he looked at Camilla, he saw not only the woman beside him, but also the words she had once written for another. The time had come. He could not remain silent any longer. One evening, after hours of passing through his study, Charles sent word for Camilla to join him. She entered the room, carefully sensing the heaviness in the air. Her voice was soft as she asked, "You wanted to see me?" Charles stood near the fireplace, the folder of letters in his hand. His eyes were sharp, filled with sorrow and anger, and he raised the folder slowly before speaking. "Do you know what I have found?" Camilla froze, her gaze falling on the folder. She stepped closer, her expression locked. "Where did you get those?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Charles, his voice shook as he replied, "They were hidden, but now they are here, and I have read every word." The room fell heavy with tension. Camilla moved closer, reaching out as if to take the letters, but Charles pulled them back. "No," he said firmly, "I need to know why these still exist." Her breath caught. She whispered, "They were from a different time." Charles stepped forward, his voice rising. "A different time. They are filled with promises, with passion, with confessions that cut through me like a knife. How am I supposed to live with this knowledge?" Camilla lowered her head. "I never meant for you to see them, but I could not bring myself to destroy them. They were part of who I was, part of my past, but they do not define who I am with you now." Charles, his hands trembled as he clutched the folder tighter. "How can I believe that these letters speak of love that lingered? They speak of a bond that you carried even when you were with me." Camilla stepped closer again, her eyes filling with tears. "Yes, I loved him once, but I love you now. I chose this life with you." Charles turned away, staring into the fire, his voice dropped heavy and broken. "You chose me, yet you kept every reminder of him. Do you know what that does to me?" The fire crackled, filling the silence that stretched between them. Camilla reached out, touching his arm, but he pulled away sharply. "Do not," he said, his voice almost a whisper. She stood still, her hands shaking. "I never wanted to hurt you. I only wanted to hold on the memories of a time that shaped me." Charles, his face twisted with pain. "That is not the point. You hid them. You let these words survive while I believe we had built our life on trust." Camilla tried to explain that the letters were just memories, her voice breaking, but Charles spun around, his voice rising again. "Memories. These are not simple memories. These are declarations. These are words meant for another, words I was never supposed to see, and now they are carved into me." Camilla tried again, her words spilling out quickly. "I cannot change the past. I cannot erase what I wrote. But I am here now with you. That is what matters." He shook his head, stepping back. "Does not feel that way. Every moment since I read them, I have felt as though I am sharing you with a ghost." Her eyes glistened as she whispered, "Please, do not say that." Charles pressed his hand against his chest, breathing heavily. "It is the truth. I cannot escape it. I cannot read those words and then look at you the same way." The room felt smaller, the air heavier, as both of them stood on opposite sides of their pain. The letters lay between them, not just on paper, but in every word they spoke. Camilla finally whispered, "Then burn them, destroy them. End it here." Charles stared at her, his face pale. "It is not that simple. The letters may burn, but the words are already inside me. They will not leave." The sound of his voice filled with sorrow broke her. She covered her face with her hands and sank into a chair. "I cannot lose you over something that no,